Hi, everyone. I'm Kim Zadel. I'm the Director of Professional Development for Decoding Dyslexia Idaho. And we're excited that our legislation passed this about 2 weeks ago and got signed. And now the work begins where we got to figure out how to train everybody between now and September, but we'll get there. I'd like to introduce our speaker tonight, which is Paul Black. He has his education specialist and he's has his NCSP, which I'll explain later, holds advanced degree.
Certified school psychologist.
Yeah, he holds advanced degrees in human exceptionality and school psychology. He has practiced as a nationally certified school psychologist for the past 18 years and is currently working as an education and literacy specialist for Reading Horizon. And at the end, we'll let you say a little bit about that, Paul. Paul has extensive experience in psychology, literacy, and technology, and understands how to accurately identify, remediate, and monitor student needs so parents and school-based teams are empowered to make meaningful improvements in student lives. And with that, I will turn it over to Paul. And welcome to Idaho, because I know you're not based in Idaho, right?
No, I'm a product of Idaho's higher education system. I'm actually at a conference in Arizona talking about structured literacy. But Idaho holds a near and dear place to my heart. It's where I first learned to ride a motorcycle, which is one of my passions. I spent my summers in Jerome, Idaho. As a kid, my mom thought that I had way too much energy and that I should expend some of that energy hauling pipe for a dairy farm. And so that's what I did. That's what I did during my summers. And I got my degree at the University of Utah in Human Development and Family Studies, and with an emphasis in early middlehood child education. Then I went on for my master's at Arizona State University and my educational specialist at Idaho State University. So the Magic Valley, most of the school districts in that area, they've seen me as their school psychologist. And so, and I still go up there quite often. My sister lives in Rigby, Idaho, not far from you, Lisa, and I still do a little bit of contract work up there in the Boise area. So yeah, Idaho's near and dear to my heart. But right now I'm enjoying 80 degrees and the beautiful weather of Arizona. So don't feel too jealous, because for somebody that left Utah when it was like 40 degrees, it's hot. I'm not sure I'm ready for what we have coming for us. So, and I'm really excited to be here talking about MTSS. The reason, and I'm more excited about this opportunity for me than I am about most opportunities that I get to speak, and I get to speak a lot because I'm not on the clock. Nobody's paying me to be here. I don't represent anybody but myself, and so I feel a little liberated that I actually get to talk a little bit about why MTSS is so important and why structured literacy is so important and why what Idaho is doing is so critical, especially on the heels of a pandemic. And kudos to Idaho. Decoding Dyslexia Idaho, when it first started, I was actually at the initial signing on the state capitol on the rotunda with the governor. And I remember thinking, boy, our saying in the West, it's stack them deep, teach them cheap. I'm not sure what kind of progress I can expect. I wasn't getting my hopes up, but here we are just a few years later, I think 3 years later about, right?
Yeah, no, it is 3. It is 3.
3 years, and we have laws on the books and lives are being transformed. And when I talk about reading and dyslexia, for me, it is so much more about reading. Reading is just a small part of it. It's really about access to a better life. It's about self-esteem. Reading morphs from this thing that we call, an academic exercise in kindergarten and first grade to becoming more of a social emotional issue and to becoming debilitating when our students get older. So I spent a lot of time in Texas. I was just in Texas 2 weeks ago. There was kind of a groundbreaking study about 5-6 years ago, which showed the reading rate of all prisoners in the Texas prison system, which they've generalized to national, was at about a 4th grade level, 75%. And so even our own criminal justice system, our Department of Justice, will say the inability to read is welded to our criminal justice system. We're not going to solve life's ills, society's problems, unless we get reading right. And the time to get reading right is when they first start. And if you leave with any information today, if you remember one thing, just remember this: we cannot tier 2 or tier 3 our way out of a tier 1 problem. Meaning we cannot intervene our way out of poor instruction in the general education classroom. And this is really what I'm passionate about. I've been doing this for about 20 years now in education, and I've seen the cycle go round and around and around. And I still see the same curriculums that we used way back when I was just starting off in the early 2000s to now. And sure, there's shinier pictures, there's new covers, but the content is the same still. And it's not just what we teach, it's how we teach it. So when I see things like units of study or Fountas and Pinnell, or even some of our own more established basals like Journeys or Wonders coming out saying, we have a phonics program now. And I look at it, I'm like, okay, do you have a phonics program, or are you saying you have a phonics program so you can sell more curriculum to the detriment of our students? And where we really need to tackle this or intervene is at the parent level, with which Decoding Dyslexia Idaho is doing, and at the teacher level, so that we can be discerning consumers of what really checks those boxes, right? What really is going to make a difference in my students' lives, not just reading, but lives. Because as a school psychologist, and I still practice, Weaver School District in Ogden, Utah, as a school psychologist, I am seeing a tidal wave of referrals coming my way, not because of disabilities, right? But because of an educational disadvantage, which was no fault of the school, of the parent, or the student. I mean, we've had a pandemic. School was canceled. Online school didn't work for 90% of our kids. And I have first graders that have never been to kindergarten. I have second graders that have never been to first grade. I have students that have missed out on that window of opportunity, where the brain is really malleable and where we're really building those foundational reading skills, and they just didn't get it. And now those little issues that we could have dealt with are big issues. And unless we solve that or address that at a tier 1 level, we are going to be spending the next decade trying to remediate students. Okay, so again, if you can remember one thing from this, it's that we can't tier 2 or tier 3 our way out of a tier 1 problem. And tier 1 being general education, tier 2 and tier 3 being intervention. Okay, so let's talk about multi-tier systems of supports. Our traditional approach, I like to call it the wait to fail model. And I think more and more districts are retiring. There's still relics of it in Idaho. We still find it. It's like where we wait until they've failed enough, or we have that difference between their ability and their achievement, that then we'll start to intervene. And the problem with that is because it morphs from an academic issue to now a social emotional issue. Where it's really students that feel like they're not smart now. And we've waited till it has taken root. In fact, I met with a 5th grader yesterday, and we were doing some academic exercises, and she says, okay, now I feel smart. I'm like, oh, honey, that breaks my heart. You've always been smart, always been smart. It's not about intelligence. You just haven't been taught the way that your brain needs to understand it. And we're going to get into how the brain learns to read. What MTSS does is it supports on the whole child. We use data to get in front of the problem. All good instruction begins with assessment. It's very systemic too, meaning we're very deliberate in the interventions that we give. Key to a true MTSS or an MTSS system that's done with fidelity is they get tier 1 right. We have these universal screeners. We have this system of gathering pertinent data that says, this is where I need to focus my energies on for these different ability levels. And this is kind of the antithesis to how government usually works, or government programs. Usually it's like, we're not going to pay any money until we see a problem that is acute enough to do something about it. that costs so much more in the long run. In the long run, I mean, we talk about students that we don't do a good job of exiting them. In fact, I would say 95% of our students that start as learning disabled in first grade, second grade, end up as learning disabled in high school. Because again, we're being too reactive. We're not getting in front of the problem. And that means you have school psychologists. That means you have IEPs, you have IEP teams, resource teachers, speech, special education directors, record keepers, and all these, this huge economy to support special education, where we could really thin that down considerably and save so much angst and heartache and money, just if we got in front of the problem. And that's what MTSS tries to do. Okay, so like it says, MTSS is also not just about academics, it's about social emotional issues too. What we're doing is we need to make sure that we have the data to support the decisions that we are making. Our data should be dispassionate. Sometimes in my mind, I'm like, okay, it's obviously this, but the data doesn't support it. For example, I've been a long-suffering Utah Jazz fan for a long time, and I think they're the greatest team in the entire universe, but the data doesn't support it, right? And there's times when I have to look at an intervention which makes sense to me in my heart, but it just isn't panning out. And I have to look at the data and say, okay, we don't have any sacred cows. There's certain things that I have to cut out that just aren't working it because I have to follow the data. That data should lead into my practices. So the data informs the practice of what I am doing. And again, the whole reason, one of the whole reasons that we're in this mess of balanced literacy and the reading deficit that we have, we're one of the poorest reading nations in the civilized world, because our practices haven't lined up with the data. We have had an illiteracy problem for a long time, yet our practices haven't aligned with the data. Now, if our intentions don't align with our behaviors, then what are we doing, right? Our intentions are to develop strong readers for all of our students. Okay, our behavior has to match that. We can't keep doing things the way they've been done. We can't lean on this, well, guess the word. We can't lean on this, well, just develop a love of reading, all these things. We have to follow the data that says that doesn't work. And the fabulous thing about the data that we have now is that it is based on neuroscience. Okay, it's not like the 90s where we're looking at this black box called the brain, kind of guessing how things work. No, that's gone. We have so many functional MRIs. Sally Shaywitz has done a lot of just fantastic research on this. We have thousands and thousands of fMRIs that show us how the brain learns how to read. We have to leverage that data, make that part of our daily teaching practice, and create systems to make sure that kids don't fall through the cracks. Okay, so all these things, it's a beautiful Venn diagram of how we support our students, our decision making, and how this leads to outcomes for our students. Okay, now MTSS, again, going back to the ways that things have been done, and what we know about the brain is that our students that struggle to read, our students that have learning disabilities especially, or are susceptible to learning disabilities, and all teenagers, I'll just say that right on the bat, struggle with executive functioning. What that means is that being able to shift from task to task, being able to remember things for recall, to use for problem solving, is challenged. It just isn't as fluid as we need it to be. What the previous way of doing things is that we would overtax a student's executive functioning, meaning they would get one thing in their basal curriculum in general education. When they go to tier 2, because there is a deficit, they give them another curriculum, a different way of learning something. Okay, now think of your cognitive bandwidth. That is taxing that more, not less. And then when they go to tier 3, learning a completely separate curriculum to learn the same skill. Now, fast forward to summer school, right? In Utah, we have 9 days. That's all we get. Okay, so 9 days. It's like enough to teach my second graders how to line up at the bathroom and wash their hands and say, please. And it's another curriculum. It's a separate curriculum. Okay, I compare this to like running a race. If I have 185 days to make my way around the track, if I get a quarter of the way and I'm not progressing, I don't say, you know what, I'm going to stop and start all over again and just hope I can make up that much more time, right? And then get another quarter way around the tracks, like, oh, that's not working, I'm going to start the race again. No, that's not how we do it. We have to be able to intensify the instruction throughout the tiers. This is grounded in neuroscience because now we're supporting the executive functioning of our students. If I have the right curriculum in tier 1, okay, and again, I don't represent anybody or anything right now, so if it's okay, I'm just going to speak frankly. If I have something that's Orton Gillingham based, like Foundations, Wilson, I love Wilson. I think that's fantastic. It's based on the science of reading. If I have something like Saxon, again, I love Saxon, you know, for my foundational literacy classes, even Spalding. My district uses Wonders, but they supplement it with Reading Horizons, right? So it's a supplemental program so they can get what they need. That's perfect for me as an interventionist, because now when that student comes to me in tier 2 or tier 3, I'm not asking them to play to their weaknesses. I'm not asking them to shift to a different curriculum. I'm not asking them to learn yet another way to do the same task I'm asking them to. I'm intensifying that instruction. I'm taking what they've given me and now saying, okay, let's take what you learned in tier 1 and let's focus in on these areas that you're weak in. Does that make sense? This is how we avoid that failing model. But my tier 2 and tier 3 have to align with that tier 1. If it doesn't, then I'm working against myself, and I'm just delaying the inevitable. As we keep going on, really quick, if y'all want to chime in too, if you want to make this interactive, or you have something you'd like to add, or you have a question, feel free to unmute, and let's just keep this casual and just let me know. Okay. All right. So the MTSS, what I like to call the whole child approach. We're going to look at the brain in a little bit, but we cannot discount behavior when it comes to our reading abilities. And there's a wonderful study in Michigan just a few years ago, which took schools and it measured the behavior. And what they saw is that behavior and academics have an inverse relationship, meaning when behavior improves or negative behaviors decrease, reading ability increases. And I see this all the time. I work in alternative settings. I'm in Arizona. I work for their juvenile corrections, and reading's a big issue. When we are born, we have this thing called the limbic system, okay, or amygdala. That's our fight, flight, or freeze issue. And that can be triggered depending on the stimulus that's presented in front of us. There are a lot of students where reading is a trigger, where it's it's not that I can't do it, it's I won't do it. Or they all of a sudden have to sharpen their pencil a million times. It's that flight, right? Those escape behaviors. I have to use the bathroom for the 4th time in this last 10 minutes. You know, it's because now we're pulling at that amygdala. And it's that fight, flight, or freeze. Reading has become a trigger for these students. And if we're going to address the behavior, we have to address the academics with it. We can't separate that. And as they get older and older, it becomes more and more intertwined. Again, that's why we have to get tier 1 right, because reading will morph from just an academic deficit, again, to a social emotional deficit, to an acquired, what I call an acquired learning disability. So we have to look at both of those. And this is that study that I was telling you about in 2016 in Michigan. And this one is fascinating to me because, I mean, this is something I've known. I think as teachers, we've known all the time. When our students are frustrated, they're going to act out, right? It just happens. If I'm a 44-year-old man, and if I have to sit through a training without any interaction and I am bored, I'm going to be tapping my pencil. I'm going to be going to get drinks, and you know, I'm educated. I'm an adult. I like to think I can function in society. So if we ask a 10-year-old, you know, to sit still in a desk for 6 hours, where 85% of their learning is going to have some facet of reading involved, and they can't read, what else am I going to get? You know, I'm going to get behaviors, and I can't isolate that. I can't compartmentalize that and say, okay, I'm going to do a functional behavioral assessment and a behavior intervention plan over here to address the behaviors, and then I'm going to address academics over here, and they can just be separate, right? No, that's not how it works. If I'm going to address the behaviors, I have to address the academic issues, okay? And back to, again, I mean, what we're trying to do is we're trying to avoid this emotional response that comes to reading. Now, we've heard of the ABCs. If you're in a behavioral classroom, you know, we have the antecedent, which leads to a behavior, which leads to the consequence. So if my behavior for my student is acting out or escape behavior or inattentive behavior or even aggressive behavior, and the antecedent is academic tasks, in this case, reading, then if I'm going to change that behavior, I have to change either the antecedent or the consequence. Now, in academic tasks, I have to change the consequence. What that means, I have to change the perceived outcome for that student. Meaning, if they are going to invest honest effort into performing this academic task, the consequence, the probability of the consequence being positive, meaning that they get it, that it makes sense, that they can swim in that growth mindset, I have to set that up for them. To do that, I have to focus on that antecedent, meaning I have to make reading appear to be less difficult for students than it is. And I have to increase the perceived self-efficacy or their ability to read. And what's fascinating, we had the NRP, National Reading Panel in 2000, they did their study, their landmark study, one of those watershed moments that say we have 5 keys of effective instruction. We have phonological awareness, we have decoding, fluency, vocabulary, and then comprehension. And all of our reading leads to the top of that pyramid, which is comprehension. When we get to older students, about 3rd or the 4th grade, the top of that pyramid is motivation. And I tell my teachers all the time, the hardest part about teaching an older student how to read isn't teaching them how to read. The hardest part is getting them to buy in. It's getting them to try. It's getting them to be motivated. And again, that is the antecedent. Again, I have to make them think that they're better readers than they are. And I have to make the material seem like it's not as hard as it is. Okay. And this is tricky because if I give a 5th or a 6th grader a book about Sam goes to the store and it's all cartoony, right? And it looks like it's for a kindergartner. What's that limbic system going to do? It's going to trigger. It's like all these feelings of shame and guilt and inadequacy are going to come. And now we start getting behaviors, right? So I have to find materials, and I have a huge library of this. If you want me to send you or email you some copies, some samples, some resource, you just let me know. I'm going to leave my phone number or my email address at the end of this. Let me know, because I have a whole bunch of things about art, science, sports, vocations that are meant for a more mature audience, adults, young adults, but are at a kindergarten through 12th grade level, right? So that way I am manipulating that antecedent. I'm giving this 6th grader, you like dirt bikes, you like motorcycles? Let's read about motorcycles. It's at a 2nd grade level, but it looks like it's made for somebody in the 6th or 7th grade, that wants to read about motorcycles. Yes.
Yeah, Paul, I'm working with a 5th grader who has ADHD as well as dyslexia.
Yeah.
And the school, the ADHD comes out when it's time to read or write.
Of course.
Which he struggles with. And so their goal was for him to reduce the number of off-task behaviors by 50%. And the parents are going, no, that's a byproduct of him not being able to read or write. Yeah. So what would you suggest? How would you explain to the school that a behavior goal is not appropriate for a kid with dyslexia?
I would say if it's situational, there's a probability that it's not true ADHD. Yeah. I would say if you're asking this child to sit for 6 hours and he is 11 years old, right, and do a task that he's not good at, I'd say you go home and you think of something that you're not good at, and you do that for 6 hours, and you come back and tell me if you felt like you were ADHD or not, right? That's what I would say. I mean, and I call it situational ADHD because sometimes there is actually a lot of times, I mean, again, I love what I do. I'm a school psychologist. I'm moving around. I'm from environment to environment, working on unique cases. I do a lot of speaking and traveling. That fits me. What doesn't fit me is being an accountant. If I had to sit there and I had to look at numbers and books, that's playing to my weaknesses, right? Okay, now there was a study, I think this is back in the early 2000s, that found that about 30% of students with ADHD had reading disabilities. Okay, but if you were able to address the underlying academic issue, the rate or incidence of ADHD dropped precipitously. Okay, so that's what I would tell them. First, I would say, prove it. Prove it. I mean, why don't you go and take a look at them at recess? Why don't you take a look at them at lunch? Why don't you take a look at them in these places where that academic demand is not on him? And then compare that to the data where that academic demand is placed on him, because you're not going to separate one with the other too. And I would bring up the brain. I would say the limbic system. I mean, reading's a trigger. I mean, he has kids all around him that can do one thing that he can't, and they're very good at it, and it's easy for them. There's a lot of shame and a lot of guilt and a lot of anxiety around reading, and that takes the cognitive bandwidth away from our cortex, right? If this is our brain, right, we have our spinal cord, our basal, this is our cortex, and this is our limbic system. And Jody Carrington does a lot of phenomenal work about this. If you're looking for a wonderful book, kids these days or teachers these days, it talks about this. It talks about trauma, how reading can even be a trauma, right? And if you don't believe that, just talk to a senior in high school that has dyslexia, has never been intervened, and you can see the trauma based. Well, the thing is, we cannot access our frontal cortex. I hear a little bit of an echo.
Yeah, I'm trying to find out who it is. I'm going to mute him.
Well, I'm just going to pretend that it's not. Like it sounds like that school is dealing with that learning disability and ADHD. I just pretend they're separate. Okay, so the thing is, if my cortex, that outer part of the brain, that is where everything good that I've learned has been stored, right there. And that's what I can access. Empathy, reading, math, life skills, how to cook, right? The thing is when this limbic system or the amygdala takes over, they call it the lid flip. Whatever I had access to is no longer there. Okay, so if reading is a trigger, my amygdala starts to take over. And I don't have access to what I've learned because now I'm frustrated. An extreme example, think about, we like to hike in Idaho, right? Northern Idaho. You got bears up there that you have to, especially in the northern country, have to worry about. If I'm hiking and I see a bear, I don't want my cortex taken over. I don't want to say, oh boy, look at that lovely mammal. I mean, the sheen on that hair, I bet they're getting a lot of fish. And look at those nails, how wonderful. I don't want access to that. I want fight, flight, or freeze, right? I want that part to take over and help me survive. Okay, to do that, it flips all of that stuff that I had learned, it's out of the picture, and now I am reacting to that emotion, fight, or freeze, right? When I have triggers, it's the same thing. If I see a page of reading and I'm like, great, I have social pressure, I have stress, I have all this anxiety now that's coming over because now I'm going to be embarrassed, and I start catastrophizing, that limbic system is starting to take over. Okay, right? I need that part to be calmed down. Okay, so I cannot learn how to read without that academic, without that trigger being addressed. And maybe that's, and hopefully the school psychs get it too. Because when I went to school, I didn't learn any of this. I've had to take conferences. I've had to do a lot of PD, and I'm actually coming down in about a week to train a whole group of school psychs. And that's one of my passions. If you have a team of school psychs, if you're a teacher that want to learn about the science of reading, how we assess for dyslexia or reading difficulties and so on, call me up. And this is free too. I work for a company that says, just go do good, go talk about literacy and try and make a difference in the world. And they are gracious enough to sponsor me to do that. So let me come talk to that school's psychological department, and let me come do a little bit of training and show them how you can't separate both of them. And we can't have our cake and eat it too. We can't say we've moved on to an MTSS system and still cling on to these vestiges of a discrepancy model, right, of the past. Right. Anyway, sorry, that's a long way to answer your question. Did that answer your question though?
Yes, it gave me a lot of input for our meeting I have on next week.
Okay. All right. Well, if you want to call me, feel free to call me too. I'd love to chat about it. Okay. So Hopefully that makes sense. So, and this goes right back into your question. The cycle of academic and behavioral failure, okay, our aggressive response. So in this case, the teacher presents the student with an academic task that they're not able to complete. That leads to fight, flight, or freeze, the escape behavior. This student is going to engage in behaviors that escape from that task. And adults engage in this too. You think about their workplace. If an adult is struggling at their job or they don't like their job, you can just take out teacher and put in boss, right? Take out student, put it in employee. Okay, so the teacher removes the academic task or removes the student. So the student has escaped that task, which reinforces that student, which doesn't lead to academic improvement, and we start all over again. Okay, so which is it? Do academic problems lead to behavior problems, or do behavior problems lead to academic problems? And I think that's really the thrust of your question. And the answer is both. And there is not a single test that will tease this out to say it is 60% here or 40% here, because they're welded together, right? One goes with the other. Okay, tier 1 barometers. We talk about where our students should be in tier 1 as far as progress goes. So when it's not uncommon, every school year, I'll get a certain class or a certain grade that will refer 20 to 25% of their student population for special education services. And that tells me that, okay, there is a foundational issue that's happening there. As a rule of thumb, 80% or more of your students should be able to be at benchmark and have 2 or less referral ratings to the office. If I don't have that taking place, to me, that's a bellwether saying that I need to do something. I need to change my tier 1 approach, right? Because more office referrals is not going to lead to a reduction in office referrals. More shoddy instruction or poor instruction, not on the teacher's part, but maybe the curriculum, is not going to lead to an increase in in reading scores or academic scores. So those are the 2 things that I'm looking at. Are 80% reaching that bellwether, that benchmark or standard that I have for my students, and 2 or less office discipline referrals per class, not per student, per class. And I get this all the time, is like, I can't do one more thing. And this year, I think I am not a school, I think I'm a teacher psychologist. And I've engaged in food therapy. I think I've ate more carbs and drank more caffeine this year just to get through than I have in my previous 19 years combined, because it is a hard year. It is a hard year to be a teacher. I've had protesters outside my school. I've had protesters at board meetings. I've had angry parents. I've had angry administrators. I've had angry coworkers. I've had frustrated students. We've had this stressor, this pandemic, that have caused all these different stressors, where we had maybe some cracks in education that we could spackle over. Boy, that we've been exposed. We can't find teachers. We can't find aides. We can't find paras. I don't care how much money we get from ESSER and from funding. If I don't have somebody to teach, and if I don't have the heart and soul of a teacher in a place where they can hold the heart of that child, that student, for 6 hours a day and give them what they need, then it doesn't matter what I do or throw out the problem. If we are going to take care of our students, we have to be able to take care of those that hold their hearts for longer than they're at home with me. And that's part that I think we're waiting for, that aha moment to come from our legislators. Every year we get one more thing to do, 5 more things. And this has been the way since I've been in education. We don't get more days. We don't get more time. We rarely get more pay. Okay. That has caused some things to break. We've been able to bend, but not break. But this year, I feel like, and last year, I feel like we've been breaking. I have a lot of teachers that they can retire. They are retiring, right? So that's the first thing before we do anything. I've always believed in having a meat tray or a cookie tray with free waters and caffeine in every faculty lounge. just as a way to say thank you, right? We just need more of that. What I will say is that if we are reacting to problems, those problems get bigger. If we are proactive in heading off those problems, our lives become easier. I compare it to a house. If I only clean my house every other week, then I am going to have a disaster. I have 4 kids. I mean, it's going to be a disaster. But if I pick up a little bit every day, it's not going to be that bad. Like my garden. If I only weed my garden twice a year, it's going to be a disaster. But if I weed my garden a little bit, maybe each day, every other day, it's going to be that much better. And we also have to be smart in what we're thinking. I have a rule of thumb. If we're going to add something academically, we have to drop something. Right? If this latest and greatest curriculum is going to come in and I'm going to ask my teachers to do this, I have to be thinking, what am I going to drop? Okay. What am I going to drop? What do I have that is overlapping? Right? Am I teaching reading 6 different ways? That has to end. That has to end. Because again, I have to focus on the teacher too. That's the non-negotiable. And I can't ask them to teach reading 7 different ways. Okay. If I'm teaching reading 6 different ways and I want to add something, then what am I going to drop? Hopefully I'm going to drop, a lot of things. And that's the same with math. That's the same with social emotional. In business, in the business world, industrial organizational psychology, they say a mediocre plan is 10 times more effective if it is executed than a very refined plan that is only mediocre at execution. Does that make sense? So we could have the best plan in place, but if we don't execute, we're going to suffer the consequences. If we only have an okay plan in place, but we execute that at a high level, we're going to see results and rewards. Now, hopefully we have a great plan and we execute at a high level. You can't do that if you have 7 or 8 different curriculums that you're working with. Okay. Another thing is what are we doing to collect academic and behavior data? I like some comprehensive data. I think once we start gathering more and more data, it dilutes the data. Give me a handful of real comprehensive data points to look at. I know NWA, MAP, those are a couple ones that I like. STAR reading, those are a couple ones that I like. But what I don't want to do is have 5 or 6 ways of measuring progress on decoding or fluency. Again, it's more to do, and it's like economies of scale. I'm putting more into it, but I'm getting less out of it. The things I want to look at is 1, content validity and reliability. Is it valid, right? Is what we are testing valid, and is it reliable? Okay, and there's some statistical markers that will tell you that. I want high validity, high reliability when it comes to my data. And if I have that, then I don't need 5 or 6 different forms of assessment. Okay, all right, now that is a lot of information to cover for y'all. And I could probably go on a lot longer. That's what I've had planned for today. So let's open it up. What questions do you have or impressions do you have? And not all at once. I know it's a school night on a Thursday. We're thinking, I can't wait to get to Friday. Let me tell you this, while you're thinking of some questions, this is my email, this is my cell phone. What I really want to do is be a resource. So what we found when it comes to professional development like this, when we do a data dump, like a lot of PDs are, we have about 5 to 7% applicability or application inside the classroom or whatever environment we're trying to put that into. But if we have more of a coaching and a mentoring model, then it goes to about 85 to 87% application. What a huge difference. What that means is don't just take this, what you learned today, and file it away. Hopefully this opens up a line of communication where you can say, you know what, I have access to a literacy specialist, I have access to a school psychologist. I have a question about reading. Why don't I just send him a text? Why don't I just shoot him an email? Or it's like my PLC is meeting and we have a lot of questions about the science of reading, about MTSS. Why don't I just have them join me on Zoom, right? or talk to my faculty meeting or present it at one of our district PD days. So I am happy to do that. And again, I come on my own will. I don't have any product that I'm pushing. So whatever you would want to hear from me, hopefully it's unbiased and it's good. And hopefully it will help the system be healthy, if that makes sense. Okay, so any questions?
So Paul, right now, we're going to, according to legislation from the legislature, we have to do some screening in the fall with our K-3 and then 4-5 with those that are not proficient on their iStation.
Yeah.
So, and also some of the districts are looking at new curriculum. I'm just kind of wondering is, like you said, don't overload the teachers.
Mm-hmm. So
would your suggestion be first find a good screener and forget about the curriculum until the following year? So
I'd make sure the curriculum is one good curriculum that is aligned with the data. Now, iStation, I have a love-hate relationship with.
Yeah.
Actually, it's mostly a hate relationship.
Yep.
With iStation. Sorry. I mean, they have had a precipitous fall too. I mean, there's not been a lot of good. It's just when you really dig into it, you just don't see the substance there in the data or the research, right? But that makes it hard because their test scores are valid to their intervention and their products, but it's not valid to like NWEA, right? NAEP scores, those types of things, which is a much more valid indicator of reading scores. What I would say, because we can, I mean, one thing that I look for in a curriculum is that it teaches to proficiency. I mean, if you've been to college, then you have taken a class that you have passed, but not learned anything in, right? Right? Okay, we have our students with learning disabilities or dyslexia, they're smart. It's not an intelligence issue. Right? And they can fake it. There are 190,000 words in the English language, 190,000. We have a very controlled set of words for kindergarten, first grade, most of second grade. Once you start transitioning into third and fourth grade, those floodgates open up. Those shortcuts that they were using to get by, I call them the shady 80 scores, those standard scores of 80s where they're not high enough to be on grade level, but they're not low enough for special education. They can fake it until that problem has taken root. Okay, so this is what I teach my school psychologists. When they come to me and we're looking at assessments and whatever it is, I'm looking specifically for reading a couple of different things. Letter identification is important, but our students are smart enough to memorize letters and sounds in isolation. Okay. And I get teachers and administrators, mostly administrators, that tell me all the time, how can you screen a kid for dyslexia in kindergarten? I say it's simple. I can do it in preschool. Yeah. And I can do it with a high efficacy too, and success rate. One, about 85% of my students that have dyslexia have a deficit in phonological processing. And I have a number of tests that can test for phonological processing, okay? They don't need to know the alphabet for me to test that. I can say things like, say, ice, without the s sound, that's I. Or put these two words together, bed, time. Those are just simple examples, So in fact, deleting sounds is, I think it's like 80% effective at determining a reading deficit in second and third grade if you do it in kindergarten or first grade. So deleting sounds, it's a powerful, powerful tool that we just don't leverage quite enough, right? But that's the phonological awareness piece or phonological processing piece. The other is rapid automatized naming, or RAM. How well do they retrieve the information they've been taught and use it for problem solving or to answer questions? Now, this is important because what we know about the brain is that reading is a team sport. It's not the black box that I was taught it was in the 80s and the 90s. We know that the executive functioning, the parietal lobe, the temporal lobe, and the occipital lobe have to work together as a team. We have to repurpose those language centers to understand reading, right? I can test how efficient students do that, how efficient they are at retrieving what I've taught them and applying it. So I'll have shapes, or I'll have colors, or I'll have symbols. that they have to identify and look at and verbally see it visually, translate that and produce a verbal answer. And I can time them how quickly they do it. So there's a lot of good tests out there that have to do with RAM, or rapid automatized naming. And I can do that in preschool, right? And I think that should be a part of every basic battery. So when I have school psychs that come to me and say, you know what, I have this 11th grader that's been in special education for reading, now reading comprehension, right? But it's really a fluency issue. They're not making progress. I'm like, well, have you measured phonological processing and RAM? Those two things. And if they say no, I'm like, take a look at it, because you're not going to get the comprehension until you get to those basic levels. You've plugged those basic gaps first. You have to do that. So that's what I look at. I look for phonological processing and I look for RAM. Those are my two big ones. Vocabulary, it's great. Right, letter word identification, again, fantastic. Fluency even, those are good ones. But all of my screeners, my universal screeners, have to have that RAN and phonemic awareness piece. Now, a lot of us use DIBELS or Acadians. They have a nice nonsense word test, fluency test, okay, where it strips those shortcuts that they've taken that I like to use. Too. I know there is actually a battery in the KTEA and in the Wyatt that you can deliver that produce a dyslexia index, which takes into account phonological processing and RAM. So if I'm doing a universal screener and I'm really wanting something with a lot of validity, that's not just going to teach the test, those are the two things that I'm going to look at.
There's a question. I don't know if Laura wants to unmute and ask her question, or if Paul wants to read it in the chat. Or
yeah, so our district is going to adopt a new reading program, K-5, next year for 23-24 implementation. We struggle to get social studies and science instruction into the school day, especially at grades 3 through 5. What are your thoughts on adopting OG-based program K-3, but not adopting a program 4-5 instead of allow teachers to focus on content area literacy? Reservations and doing that because we lose consistency in grades 4-5. And yeah, okay. And that's okay. So I love OG programs. I think they're the gold standard. And I mentioned a few of them here. The problem I have for OG training is I don't have an hour of prep time to plan for an hour of instruction, right? And OG programs, for the most part, were developed in like labs on college campuses, and are fantastic. It really leverages the science, but when you work from a lab outside into the classroom, boy, I mean, unless you've taught and been in a classroom, there's things that you just don't understand. You know, it's a unique animal. I know I have a lot of curriculum companies that come to me, and it's like they think the only thing that I teach is math all day long, because it's like, well, you just have all this time in the world just to focus on this one subject. It's like, no, we don't. Okay, so that's one thing that I look at. For my foundational reading skills, I think 30 to 45 minutes a day. That's for that phonological processing, that's for decoding, and that's for fluency. 30 to 45 minutes a day, you should be able to do it. And you should be able to prep 15 to 20 minutes, meaning that I want a curriculum that is scripted. And I don't have to follow the script, right? But I want the script there when I need it, because I've just had a meltdown with another student or a parent and I haven't had enough time to prep. Just because of the realities of teaching, I want something as scripted. I want the intervention piece built in, meaning at the end of each lesson, I want to see differentiated strategies for my different groups of students. I don't have to use those strategies, but if I've had a day, I want that there to make it simple. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. So those are two things. They have to be very teacher friendly. And I have a little bit of OCD in me. I like my stuff to come color coordinated, and I like to have an index where I can just flip through it and see this is where that is. Okay. And so if I'm doing an OG program, K3, that's the best place to do it. And then once you get to 4th and 5th, then that becomes more of a tier 2 issue, if that makes sense. So traditionally, that's what it's been, is we just do tier 2 for grades 4 and above. Let me just catch my train of thought again. There are some schools I know in the Boise area, the Elevate Academy is one of them. And I have some other schools in the Boise area and in, I think, the Blackfoot, Idaho area, where their population is almost 2/3 English language learners, or that transitory. And so it makes sense to have 4, 5, 6 have Orton Gillingham instruction instead of intervention actually in tier 1. Okay, and I agree with that, because again, you're saving time in the long run too, and you're making a bigger difference. In a typical school year, K3 is great, and then switch to 4 or 5 intervention, using that same type of curriculum for 4 through 5, and hopefully, again, it's socially and emotionally appropriate or developmentally appropriate, and do it that way. Hope that helps. And vertical alignment, that's my favorite. That's one of my favorite words, right? Like going from curriculum to curriculum to curriculum doesn't make any sense. Find something that works for your school, that works for your teachers, that you have buy-in, that the publisher can support. Now, I lost one of my trained teachers when I was in Arizona about 10 years ago, and I called the company up and I said, we need someone to come out and train us. And they said, we're 16 months out. 16 months before we could effectively use that curriculum. 16 months. Said that won't do. So we opened up an RFP, and one of the first questions we ask is, how far out are you as sending somebody in person to work with us? And they said 2 weeks. I said, okay, that's 80% right there. If you can get somebody on the phone, online, in person to do on-the-job training, job coaching, or PD training, then that's half of the battle, because again, the teacher is the non-negotiable. We have to support it. So find something that fits that bill, and then just ride that curriculum. Okay, use that curriculum, become experts in that curriculum, and then when it goes to intervention, follow through. If they have an intervention piece that's robust, follow through with that curriculum so you can intensify the instruction. Don't do something different in tier 1, tier 2, and tier 3, because it just exacerbates the problem, makes it worse. Okay, and I have another one, the Wyatt subtests. It's the Wyatt and KTA, and they actually have a flyer that I can send you. And let me find out what those are really quick for you. I'll be able to answer those. But they had the Wyatt's one of my favorite ones, because it does do that phonological processing. It does that RAN, and it's K12 too. And I really think the phonological processing test on the KTA is superior than a lot of what I get anywhere else. And I'll use that often as a screener. Again, if I have a teacher in the middle school that's like, they're still stuck at this 4th grade slump, and I know why, I'll do this phonological processing test, and it will illuminate that. Okay, so what the subtests are: phonological processing, letter word recognition, letter naming facility, again, that's your RAN, nonsense word decoding, spelling or encoding, and word recognition fluency. So those are the 6 subtests.
Thank you.
Yeah, those colorblind tests are a lot of fun to do. If you've not seen those, it spells words or does symbols, and it has a different reds or greens or shades. And if you're colorblind, you're not able to see it. And actually, 2 of my neighbors that are my son's friend are colorblind. And so I've been able to actually, like Paget, use them as my own test subjects, trying to figure my own stuff out. But you're right. And sometimes I like, when they're younger like that, I like shapes too. Circle, square, triangle, rectangle, or even animals like dog, cat, bird, fish, things like that. So there's a lot of them that you can do that aren't color-based, that are effective out there. And there's a lot of different ways to measure RAN too. So it doesn't have to just be that one test. And that's another thing that you should emphasize when we're talking about data. One piece of data is just one piece of data. We're trying to build a fresco, a big picture of what we're looking at. And when we just lock onto one piece of data, then like you were mentioning, when it comes to behavior or academics, when we're just so hyper focused on one thing, it's not seeing the forest through the trees, so hopefully it has a high validity rate, and hopefully within that assessment I have 2 or 3 ways of measuring that. Most good assessments have that, where if I'm measuring like RAN, I'm going to be able to do it 2 or 3 different ways and compare those subtests to that what is it? The bigger test. It's late in the day. I haven't had enough caffeine. Index. The index that I measure.
So Paul, when you get these kids referred, like we don't want to overpopulate the SPED department because they're already overpopulated.
Well, SPED doesn't do a good job at exiting. We just don't.
Right.
And so it's not a very effective intervention. And again, it's because we're waiting for that problem to root itself.
Right.
And then we're not giving the resources that it deserves. Oh, so you've done that. So anyway, sorry.
No, I agree with you. So what we want to do is a fast screener that the teachers can give to their students. And they don't have to be, trained psychologists to be able to do it. Do you have any suggestions for that? I know Dibbles could be one.
Dibbles is great because it's everywhere and teachers are familiar with it and students are familiar with it. The issue I have with Dibbles is that if it's a student that struggles with reading, going into a situation where they're taking that test with somebody they don't know, and it's already kind of a trigger for them, it's going to exacerbate that. And sometimes you're going to get a lot of false positives too, but better too many false positives than too many false negatives. Right. So I do like that one. But there should be, what we have is level 1 and level 2 screeners is what we typically do before we go to a SPED evaluation. So I will do like a Cadence or a Dibbles screener, and then I'll funnel it down with something else. There's FastBridge. I have a lot of, there's STAR, there's MAP, there's all these other ones that I can use. And and I might even just pull out some of the KTA ones. What I'm going to look at is when we look at that funnel of kids and say we give the Dibbles and I get this list of students, I'm going to see who on that list has a parent or a sibling that has reading difficulties. Right. And I'm probably going to fast track those students. And I might give a portion of the KTA or the Wyatt of those screeners that I already mentioned to say, okay, because I know that's a valid test. It's very robust. And I can do it very quickly if it's just 1 or 2 subtests. The great thing is that if that comes back low, I can hurry up and get my evaluation permission test in and finish the evaluation. That way I'm not reinventing the wheel. So my level 2 and level 3 screener are the same. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
And if I have a student that has a family history of dyslexia or reading difficulties, I'm probably going to do that. Or if they have a history of speech deficits, so if they're in speech, we know there's that big overlap, I'm probably going to fast track them. For those others that don't have any of these other indicators, I'm going to have that level 2 screener that filters out those false positives. And if they come back saying, okay, they're fine, then they go on a monitoring list and I say, okay, teacher, check back in with me in 4 to 6 weeks, just so we don't have somebody slip through the cracks. If it validates the previous screener, okay, let's start with our interventions. We know what they are. Are they getting good tier 1 instruction? What tier 2 interventions are we doing? How are we tracking that? And what's our meeting schedule? We want to meet every 2 or 3 weeks on this student, no longer than 6 weeks to really make a decision on whether or not we need to go to a full SPED referral, which brings me to another thing. Find a software program that will do that for you, because the concern has to line up with the intervention, that has to line up with the data. And rarely do those 3 things align unless I have some kind of software tracking. And a lot of the curriculum that you have that software piece, but then I can look at it as a team. We can put it up on the TV or on the big screen and say, okay, this is how much time they spent on the intervention. This is where they were pre, during, and post-test, and what are my patterns? And because when I feel such guilt when there are still schools that have me hand this 20-page packet to this poor teacher during a pandemic and say, fill this out, handwrite an intervention, and now graph it for me. And it gets to me, and that doesn't line up. Maybe it's a reading difficulty, but they're monitoring it with spelling. And I have to say, you know what, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board and do another 3 to 6 week round of intervention. And there's nothing worse because it's really the student, that fails. So having something that gets me those 3 things, so it doesn't take a whole dang school year to refer a kiddo, to give them what they need, is important. Hopefully that answers your question.
Yeah, and Tammy has a question.
Yeah.
Thank you. You had mentioned there was a Wyatt that
Yeah.
test that you're using as a screener. Could you say that again?
Yeah, the Wyatt. Let me find the Wyatt one. And the Wyatt and the KTA are made by the same folks. And let me find their screener. And if you Google it, it actually has a flyer that they have. And I've actually found a lot of success with it. I thought it's been a great use, a great help. Let me just find which one it is for the dyslexia screener.
Thank you. Could you list these at the end? I appreciate that. Thank you.
You bet. And actually, let me see if I can, just copy and paste it into I'll do that. I'll see if I can't copy and paste that right into the chat.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I will get in touch with Paul and we'll come up with a list of things to send out to everybody that is registered.
Brilliant. Thank you.
One thing I would stay away from is these criterion-based assessments for dyslexia. So I know Shaywitz, and she's wonderful, but Pearson it was a money grab. They created an assessment based on the Shaywitz screener, and it doesn't give you any usable data. It doesn't give you any usable data. It's a checklist, right? And so stay away from those kinds of assessments. You want something that is reliable, that's valid, that gives you data, that gives you measurement of those skills, specifically RAN and phonological awareness. Okay, anything else?
Yeah, Tabitha, you want to ask your question?
Sure. What software are you talking about? Are you talking about Dibble software or?
Yeah, I like Dibbles. And so, if you go to Weaver School District, it's we're still trying to go on a diet because we have 8 different things of software that we use now. I'll just put it out. We use Dibbles and we use Reading Horizons. I like Reading Horizons foundational, and that's what we use in my district. That's what I use in Arizona. But a disclaimer, you have to know our biases and even our hidden biases. I work for Reading Horizons as a presenter too. So just take that for a grain of salt. But it has those foundational reading skills that I like. If I wasn't using that, I'd be using STAR or MAP. And I'm not a big fan of Read 180. I call a lot of these assessments all foam and no beer. They look pretty. They have all these wonderful graphs and they have these numbers and everything like that. But if it's not valid, it's not valid, right? The presentation can look fantastic, but if it doesn't help the student and have valid results, then it's not great. It's not useful to me. So those are the ones that I would probably use.
And then I was just I know when I talk to school psychologists and I suggest somebody, and a lot of times I get that they can't use the Wyatt or the assessments that you're talking about.
Yeah.
I guess I'm trying to figure out how to get past that. So, my background is in special ed. I came from California. I moved to Idaho. I became a reading specialist. They're moving me back to the classroom. And I just want to be an advocate for these students. And I feel that iStation, what you were talking about, I work in a Title I school, large EL population. There's always excuses with EL students. And I'm no, there's something going on. I promise you.
iStation is not doing them any favors.
No. And I'm just trying to be now as a reading specialist, I could be an advocate for them. Now I kind of am moving out of that spotlight, and I'm trying to figure out what I can do, I guess.
Well, first of all, Dallas, Texas is where iStation is based. and they were giving it away for Texas, and Texas after the first year said thanks but no thanks.
Really?
And you know, when an education company is doing that, you know that something is wrong.
Yeah, and Texas got sued because they were testing enough kids.
No, they weren't. They were trying.
So that, I mean, that's pretty.
I know. Oh, and I just found that app. Here's the other thing you need to know. And I say this as a psych myself. Psychs think they know everything.
Mhm. Mhm.
And they can be a pretty intimidating group to work with, if that makes sense. And I'm going to see if I can't copy this. No. And so, you know how we do with our IEP kiddos with the team? The best thing is to do is to take a team approach. I mean, the psych doesn't have to be the one to give this data, right? Ideally, they would just make it part of their battery, but often they just don't. And they're overwhelmed and there's lots to do, and they have the same issues that we have, right? As teachers, but that doesn't mean that your hands are tied. So a special education teacher can give the Wyatt, they can give the KTA, the speech pathologist. Oh, do they have a wealth of expertise when it comes to language and phonological processing and RAN? They have a whole battery of tests. And if a speech pathologist, I mean, if a psych is not utilizing and leveraging that expertise, then they are missing out. So there's ways around it as the team. And sometimes you have to, unfortunately, you have to do that, where you have to work around that school psychologist because they're stuck in their ways or whatever the issue is until they can see the light, right? But you can do that with your special education teacher, with your reading interventionist, and with your speech and language pathologist. But it comes back to that growth mindset. I mean, do they have a growth mindset?
So I use I use Kilpatrick's PAST test.
Yeah,
I'm just curious on your thoughts, because I have kids who are like not doing well, but they're not horrible. And I'm like, you know, I just wonder how valid that is too, because that's I'm very capable of giving that, and I see a lot of deficits, and I work on those, you know, skills where they fall. I'm just curious your thoughts on the test. And I know Kilpatrick was going through on getting it added into one of the special ed testing.
Yeah, and he's actually been in the news a little bit lately. There's been some controversy surrounding Kilpatrick.
Yeah.
Because supposedly he doesn't do phonemic awareness or phonics the way somebody else does. And this is why it's important to have that growth mindset. And you know what? I mean, kindergarten teachers can predict with 85% accuracy whether or not one of their students will end up in jail at one point of their lives or another. 85%. How much easier is it to predict reading difficulties, right?
Well, and I teach at a school where we have a lot of that. And so we would think we would have a higher population because, you know, lots of kids, lots of people in jail, I forget what percent, 60% or something in jail have a learning disability.
75%.
How many?
75.
So I'm just like, okay. Anyways, I was just wondering about your thoughts on that PAST test.
Oh, I like the PAST test. I think it has some good stuff. I think it's if I remember right, it's free, isn't it?
It's free.
Yeah.
It's one of those we're looking at since the legislature didn't give us any money for the testing.
You know, and you could do worse than the PAST test. And I just put in that Pearson one with the Wyatt and with the KTEA that's in there. I like the PAST test because it's free and it does an okay job. It's not as comprehensive as I'd like, but as a level 1 screener, I think it's adequate. If Dibbles isn't available or Acadians isn't available, I'd probably go to something like the PAST, and I would loop in my speech language pathologist because they can do a 5-10 minute screener and actually produce some data on some of their subtests that measure specifically RAN or phonemic awareness. And you can be a speech language therapist assistant and actually give those. And some of the school psychs or even master's level special education teachers can give some of those what we think of traditional speech and language pathologist tests to do, if that helps.
Yeah. Okay.
You.
Camille?
I did end up putting my question in the chat, but we do have a bigger district. So fortunately that allows academic coaches, testing coaches, differentiated instruction coaches. Myself, I'm a consulting teacher. We can do more testing that's not as involved or doesn't take the specialized training of the Wyatt or Woodcock Johnson, you know, the different assessments. So my question was just simply like, if we don't even want to have to burn a testing protocol for doing the Wyatt some tests, you know?
That $14 protocol for two.
Yeah,
tests?
for just
I
3
get that.
subtests, yeah. Then do you think Hegarty's
Yes.
phonological awareness is adequate, or the readiness test? There's in the Sunday program, it has a phonological awareness section.
Yes, I like those actually quite a bit too. Hegarty is one of my favorites. There's some things that I think we need a better, a smaller window when we introduce those sounds to those graphemes with Hegarty, but Hegarty's pretty good. And Sunday, that's another one of those Orton Gillingham based program in California.
I was trained in that one.
Right? Tabitha, yeah, it's really big in California. It's just hard to scale as an instructional program, but as an assessment, that readiness test, that's wonderful. That'd be great. You can do much worse than that.
And that one is easy to plan. You do not have to spend. It is the easiest program that I've ever used. It doesn't, like Wilson has so many materials. Sundays is very simple. I got trained as a special ed teacher there, and I brought it here to Idaho, and I'm taking it with me to my classroom, whether they like it or not.
You know, those Orton Gillingham based programs, Barton's another one that has a lot of home-based users because it's very simple. So you have, you know, Wilson, Saxon, Barton, Sundays, the company I worked for, Reading Horizons. I mean, those ones, Orton Gillingham based, I found those are a lot more robust, and their validity scores are a lot higher in my experience than a lot of these other programs.
Okay, Deanne.
Okay, so the STAR test that you've talked about, is that by Renaissance? Is that the Renaissance STAR test?
I can't remember who.
Some people are going, yes.
Yes.
Yes, is it? Okay, my curriculum. Okay. Yeah, it is the Renaissance software.
Okay.
But again, that's another one that's probably not the highest one on my list too. It's just one that's readily available. I'd probably rather use the Dibbles or Acadians rather than the STAR test.
I think
that's
that
me personally.
Our school district has decided to use the STAR testing because it goes from K through 12, and they want something that will go straight through. So I think we're going to go to that. So there's a lot more. I know the STAR test from 100 years ago, and all it did was give us a like reading range there. So it's much more than that now.
I think so. You know, again, I haven't kept up with it. It's one that's out there. One thing you have to be careful now is that publishers have caught on that if it looks shiny, some people think that it's valid, right? And so, I mean, look at iStation. That's a perfect example. I mean, the data that it presents looks awesome, right? And so there's a lot of companies that say, well, it just has to look good. But I don't know how, with that STAR test, I don't know if that's as much as a recommendation as something maybe that I'm just used to or familiar with. So maybe some of the teachers on here might have a little bit more insight to the STAR test and how it's been for their district. Anybody?
Yeah, I don't think it's changed that much. We switched over to iStation for primary, but they were still using an upper grade when I taught 7th grade. And I think it does that whole
zone of proximity.
Yes, thank you. Yes, yes. I was wondering about the iReady reading is intense. It's a long test.
Yeah.
But I was wondering about that. Obviously
that's what I don't like about it. If it takes longer than 15, 20 minutes, then it's like economies what is scaling your economies? I mean, the more you put into it, the less you get out of it, and teach students just peter off. I mean, and we have so much to do, and our students have so much to learn. We should be able to do a curriculum-based measurement and go in and out and have a valid data point. So if it's taking longer than that, and I even think 15, 20 minutes is pushing it in a setting, personally.
Okay.
Well, this has been fun. I would love to do this again. We have some great minds that are here. And so I'll have to start attending these more regularly.
Yeah.
If any of you would like me to come to your school, I'm in Boise all the time. I have family that still lives up there. I'd be happy to do anything for your faculty, for your school psychs, for your PLC group. Tabitha, it sounds like we should connect on LinkedIn or something. It sounds like you have some good stuff going up there. I would love to collaborate with you or anybody else that's interested. I mean, because again, for me, this is my older brother's dyslexic. I found out that my uncles, my grandparents, were Utahns, so we have lots of kids. They had 9. 4 of them had reading difficulties. I didn't know this until I was an adult, and one of them didn't graduate high school, and the other one's barely graduated high school. This is back in the 70s and the 60s when you just had to really show up. And I wasn't encouraged to go to college. School was not something that was a positive, because there were so many negative feelings towards it. In fact, when I applied to go to college, I got a lot of pushback from my family. Like, why are you doing that? Why do you want to go be with those elites and those other things? What you need to do is this or that. And these are coming from my heroes, my uncles that can tear down a tractor and put it back together without a single instruction manual. I mean, brilliant, genius people. And it's because reading is so stigmatized to them. So for me, this is personal. I mean, this is personal, because if it weren't for that one teacher, and I almost didn't graduate high school because it wasn't a priority. If it weren't for that one teacher that said, Paul, I'm not going to let you fail. I graduated with a 1.8 GPA. And I skipped the 4th grade. Because they didn't know what to do with me, because they said I was gifted. It didn't have anything to do with intelligence, but I had a teacher that said, you know what, I see something better for you. And my senior year in high school, she got me started. I went to the only school that would let me in, which was BYU, Idaho, because I served a mission and I hated it. And it's so cold. Got straight A's though, and got into Weber State University, got straight A's, got scholarships. Got accepted into my PhD program, and the rest was history. But it was because of one teacher that saw the big picture. And if I can help teachers find that student, find that me, and see the bigger picture, I'll come up on my own dime. I'll spend my own money, my own time, making that happen. So yeah, you have my contact information. Text me, email me, call me, whatever, and any way that I can help, further the mission, or better people's lives through literacy, let me know, and I'm all in for that.
All right, so Paul, put October 8th on your calendar, and Ramona,
Okay.
We've decided to go with October 8th, which will be our 4th annual Decoding Dyslexia Idaho Conference.
Right.
It'll be held at the West Ada School District office, and more information will be coming out later, but we have Dr. Nancy Mather coming and Jan Hasbrook. Both of them are
yes,
top people in the field.
Y'all have like the best lineups too.
Yeah,
I mean, one of the best conferences in the country is the one that y'all put on.
Yeah.
Okay, I will be there.
All right.
Absolutely. And you have a hamburger place called the Bun Basket up there in Boise. Have you ever had, if you haven't been, does anybody know the Bun Basket in Boise? Any Boise people? Oh my word, it is. And Lisa, are you from Boise or Nampa?
No, I'm actually from Blackfoot, Idaho, but I work in Boise quite a bit, and we have family there. And I work actually with the state board, the curricular review committee, where they approve what has been put in by the publishers. So we finally get to go back to Boise this year, and we love it because we do all our work and then we go out to eat. So I'm going to be like, hey guys, we're going to the Bun Basket.
The best hamburgers I've had across the country, and they have this huckleberry cheesecake shake. I'm kind of a foodie, where they pick their own huckleberries and they preserve them. And you can go during certain times of the year and get a huckleberry cheesecake shake. And it is diabetes in a cup, and I will eat it all day. It is so good. If I could only eat one thing for the rest of my life, it would be the Bun Basket's huckleberry cheesecake shake. And I would never grow tired of it. So anytime you want to have me in Boise, I am all game to go up there to Boise. Boise has a lot of great resources. You watch the next 10 years, there's certain hot spots around the country where it's like, wow, this is a place where literacy, like Tim Odegaard, right? Over there in Middle Tennessee State, we have just as good of resources up here in Boise with the professionals that we have and the connections that you have to be just as good or even better. To be really one of those destination places where people come and look to the Treasure Valley as a place where if you want to understand literacy and dyslexia, I mean, this is one of the places that you need to come.
Yeah,
And
and
that's
the
exciting.
state's finally recognizing that. So with that, I'm going to stop the recording. 'Cause